This computer. So good morning. I'm back with Brian McBlain to talk about the ins and outs of mercury and lead and all those things. So Brian is an actual scientist, as was Andy, not like myself, as I am a French major and I've only picked all this stuff up secondhand. A liberal arts major. Brian has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry, a master's degree in crop physiology, and production, and a PhD in plant breeding. So my mother used to call that a highly educated woggle bug from the Wizard of Oz. And he got seriously exposed for a whole variety of reasons to heavy metals starting out when he was a child because your parents ran an orchard, right? So most of it came down. I always remember you telling the story about playing hide and seek in a huge wooden barrel that was used to store God knows what.
It was actually an old model orchard sprayer that was built in barrel fashion with all the staves. It actually had a flat top, interestingly enough, but the rest of it was barreled, and it was wood, and who knows how many chemicals went into that. And we pretended it was a submarine, and we'd act out different war activities, myself and my brothers, and then Dad detected us using it, and he banned us from ever being in it again. But it is many years of that kind of exposure. We don't know how much stuff we got exposed to just doing that. And then we used to, when the tractor wasn't sitting in the drive shed, we would often play like with a kickball, kind of a set a goal at each end of it. But all the walls all around were bags of pesticides, and the ball would occasionally hit them and a puff of powder come out. And the number and diversity of exposures was just unbelievable.
So you said you're sort of a testament to the fact that well, you're one of those people. I mean, you said to me once that if you weren't a really good excreter, you'd most likely be dead.
Yeah. I got some major exposure at around 2 because I went from talking in paragraphs, sentences, etc., to not speaking very much. My sister debates that, but she used to always cut in and answer for me. She would, and when I was in 2, she was already in grade 1, so she wasn't home most of the day. So I just have to go with what Mother said, that basically I went to from very verbal to almost nonverbal. And then
you live to tell the tale, and you grew up to get 3 degrees, which is like,
yeah.
And people do very well with mercury, even though they're struggling with this toxicity. It causes all kinds of problems, but people live to be very quite old, actually. I'm thinking of my aunt who died at 93, who was, had every symptom in the book except dementia. She didn't get dementia.
Well, at 4.5, used to watch Romper. Well, we had 3 Canadian television stations and 3 American television stations.
Those are really
So,
nice.
but I watched Romper Room on the American channel, and that was Pledge Allegiance to the Flag. So towards regaining verbal abilities, I cited the Pledge of Allegiance, and my mother then said, "That's very nice, but we're Canadian." But anyway, I ended up in the U.S. Maybe how do you propaganda on Romper Room. Okay, aimed at the under 5 set. Yes. Anyway, yeah, it worked. I'm here. But yes, I wonder if I would have survived oh, that my symptoms would have been a lot worse at that age, and that I'd maybe never have become reasonably verbal. So
Yeah.
that's a bridge I didn't have to cross because I had some ability to release it. Now, touching on a thing that you raised,
What's that?
um, Andy noted this too, that there was a high degree of, what would you call it, people on the spectrum who were in faculties all over the United States and Canada, et cetera, that they've done very well academically. I have a theory untestable, at least given that we have to treat people humanely, can't treat them like rats. And that,
Oh, really?
yeah, some people do, yeah, don't they? But I mean, with reasonable scientific accuracy, that kind of stuff. It turns out Einstein's brain has a preponderance of helper cells for I forget the name of them right off the top of my head here. Um, it's not just the neurons, it's the cells that help support them, that help that they think help make him such a remarkable mental power. Um, I conjecture that mercury, those are the same cells that should be packing the mercury away and keeping it away from the nerve cells. So one would think that people subjected to mercury may be a
Oh, I thought-
tendency to have a higher density of the, um, almost had them. Anyway, somebody can look it up if they want to, that exact name of the cell. But anyway, that's my theory. But unless we get some cadaver studies done, we're not going to know
That's
more
going to
about that.
happen. But Russell Blaylock has stuff to say about that too, about people with mercury poisoning being really smart. Andy would say, and he had some theories about why, I think to do with excitotoxin. I don't know.
Yeah,
But Andy, all he would allow to me was that being really intelligent is a risk factor. That's all he would say.
yeah, yeah. Um, you build compensatory systems when mercury screws you up, so you're not functioning in certain ways.
Yeah,
So
I can sense that myself. Yeah.
so if you become sort of asocial, or it's not that you're actually against being social, it's just that you're not particularly driven to be social. you know so in the playground, you go do something, a mental game by yourself, rather than play with the thing, particularly if they've been less than hospitable to you, like, screw you, I'm going to go over here. I don't need other people. I'm perfectly functional on my own.
I think I hung out with all the little boys with Asperger's when I was a child. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember an incident where I was standing on the boot scrape. Yeah, it tells you a little bit about a country school. We had a big yard with lots of grass that didn't grow, so you easily get mud. So we had to scrape our boots off in the spring and the fall. Had this big long scraper, but I was standing on that and leaning against the school, and I got called. He said, "What are you doing?" I'm just standing here thinking. And he said, "Well, you're supposed to be out here playing. You're not playing." So I'm thinking, when did they make a rule that you had to play at recess or on lunch or any other time? And who defined play? If I'm playing around my mind, like a thing. But this particular teacher was a drunk, and I think he was just having a very bad day, so he'd find somebody to pick on. But I remember that he basically singled me out for not being out there playing with the other. They just didn't feel like it. And that was, by the way, right after I had the front tooth a whole filling went right down to the gum line. Because I'd hit my front tooth and split the back side of it off. Had a little corner taken in the backside, so they just filled that all in with they didn't have good white fillings at the time, so,
No, they just
or at
had
least if they did,
old-fashioned amalgam at least. I
they
hear
didn't last long.
the newer versions of amalgam are that well you mentioned that came out in the 60s or the 70s off gas a whole lot more than the really old
Yeah,
ones.
sometime in the late 70s. I haven't. Andy had the date down someplace, and when I was thinking when it was, when I got all my amalgams pulled, because they were old and they had issues around the edges. Um, we debated putting in non-amalgam, but they were so much more expensive. Their wear was less. My insurance wouldn't cover it. And I'd had a mouthful of amalgams all that time and didn't seem to have any major problems. I'd graduated as an Ontario scholar from high school and done well at university, and I was now a PhD at that time. Faculty at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, I have to say. And so we talked about it, but we concluded that there wasn't much of a risk, but we didn't know that, as far as I know, the new amalgam, we'll call that new amalgam. I don't know if they have any one sense. We definitely had more copper. I think it had less silver. That was the deal. It was less expensive because they swapped out the silver for the copper, but that made it a less stable amalgam, and so it off-gassed more mercury. And so I had not only the big exposures from the taking out of 13 fillings, the front one, I put a cap on the front tooth, so that left me 12 new ones. And I suddenly had migraines I never had before. I had what they call cluster headaches.
Just what else happened when you did that? I did the same thing. What happened to you?
Migraines, cluster headaches. My office was on the second floor. I had to pull myself up with the banister to get to my office.
Did you recover from that somewhat?
Sorry?
Did you recover from that to some extent without doing anything?
Yes, but it was a long and tedious process. I also got sleep apnea from it. I don't know it's because my sleep was completely interrupted and screwed up at night, and so I was just exhausted in the day. But there was times I had to go out to my car, find a private spot, and go to sleep in the car because I couldn't function. Had to sleep, or I was going to be asleep at the desk, which isn't a very good look. So, but it turns out that in 2000 we found out I had very bad sleep apnea. So I may have been dealing with sleep apnea on top of the amalgam poisoning.
But the amalgam poisoning would have caused the sleep apnea. You would have had it otherwise. But it might have been prior to the dental work, you mean?
Well, yeah, I could have had it all along.
You mean
We didn't
just like
find out until I had a issue which we couldn't tell whether it was heat stroke from being in the hot greenhouse or whether I had heat stroke and heart or whether it was heart. Hard to tell. So they put me in overnight, and I was woken by the nurse who was watching over me, and said, "You stop breathing." I said, "Well, just trying to make sure you're paying attention." And about an hour or two later, she woke me again that I'd stopped breathing and hadn't started to breathe again until she prodded me. "Yep, you're still paying attention. Good." She like my sense of humor. I don't know, but at any rate,
well, there is a sense of humor that goes along with this. Actually, I wrote about that.
Yeah,
it's a little black, but it's there.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's yeah. You should have seen me and my brothers have. I think it comes out with emotional times. Um, so at funerals, my grandparents' funerals, we got myself and my brothers got off on some tangents, but it's a way of releasing. You laugh and you get
yes.
It's a now some of the other neighbors in that thought we were maybe a little bit too rowdy, but I've heard that this is pretty common at funerals anyway. So I wonder if it's a measure of how toxic your family is.
How much fun they have at funerals.
Yeah, how much they want to live on the funny side, always look on the bright side of life, right? Money Python theme. Anyway, we were talking about there's a lot of brighter people that I was on faculty with. I would suspect were mercury toxic.
Well, my father has sort of Asperger's syndrome, and he was a Rhodes Scholar and was so brilliant. But I remember him having to like, he'd do three things at once. Like he'd be watching TV and typing on, and as soon as an ad would come on, he had this blab off. He'd turn off the sound, he'd type on his typewriter, and then he'd go back to watching TV. And
So he had a remote on his TV back then.
he connected it himself. It was a little
Ah,
switch it was hardwired, a little switch.
ah, yeah,
So he'd turn off the sound and he'd get on his type, and then we'd all start yelling at him to turn it off when the program came back. But it was the extent to which he had to concentrate. Like, I think he developed powers of concentration that were extraordinary because he had to. Otherwise, because I read, and I remember on the Yahoo group, some person describing it as all this material coming in, and you can't, and there are no filters.
right.
So in order to accomplish anything, I always thought that he had to doubly concentrate more than anybody else. And then maybe that made him smarter than other people. I don't know. He was pretty brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if it makes anything, my dad went on to be president of the local mutual insurance company and then president over the association of those companies. He was also on the board of education, where he was head of the chair for the amalgamating all the townships into one county board of education, and which required, you mentioned you're closing schools, it makes you real popular. But he did such a good job of getting that through that they made him the chairman he was the first chairman of the newly consolidated county board of education. And he was in that position as I was in my last year of high school. My mother was head of PTA, which is, so that was rather interesting. But the man that was superintendent of the schools at his funeral said that Dad was the smartest man he'd ever met.
He'd ever met. Well,
Yeah, and that
he
and figured
doesn't
he's
sound like he suffered from chronic fatigue.
um, he would fall asleep on the. We had a little couch at the side of the far kitchen,
Fall
and he'd
asleep,
be
like
reading.
take cat naps,
Yeah,
like my
yeah,
father,
catnap.
same thing.
And he'd read the minutes and everything for the meeting, the board of education meeting, or whatever meetings he was going to go to, and he'd fall asleep off and just set it aside, and then pick it back up and finish off where he was at.
Yeah, my father,
Um,
same thing. Yeah.
but yeah,
Naps, he was
and he
just,
was also involved with the local federal and provincial politics, so that the representative for the county read them into the minutes, like reading you into the Senate minutes
yeah.
to recognize so not too many of us get recognized by our federal government as on the role they performed at the grassroots level. And so yeah, he was a mover and shaker, but a very gentle mover and shaker. That was no, there was no, not backroom boss, coming down you. It was all gentle persuasion. Yeah.
Well, those people
Anyway,
often aren't very smart. Yeah.
but I remember him making the spray for the sprayer for the orchard, and one of the nozzles would be plugged up, and he just unscrew it and he'd blow it out with his.
What was he what substances were you using?
Oh, phenylmercuric acetate was used to spray for apple scab, and it's an organic mercury compound, so it's absorbed right across your blood-brain barrier. There's nothing stopping it, and your brain will then split the mercury off and do whatever it does with it. But it's more or less stuck there until you chelate. Um, some of us apparently are able to stuff it away someplace, so called sequestering. Um, and that hasn't been fully explored as to who, but is a about 25% of us don't sequester worth a darn. And that's shown on page 20 of Amalgam Illness, where he plotted out a couple of populations of people who'd been made toxic, and the majority get to half the blood level of mercury in like 2-3 months, and the minority, it takes 9 months or more to get to that stage. So yeah, so our Andy, I believe, was one of the sensitives, because as far as from my memory of what he had said, it wasn't a long time before he had a few amalgams placed until his illness, and he made that connection pretty rapidly.
Yes.
And whereas I'd had amalgam filling since I was like 10, maybe even earlier than that, maybe 6 or 7 for the first ones. I don't know. We didn't practice very good hygiene, and didn't brush teeth enough. So I probably had several in the baby teeth before getting it mature adult teeth. Definitely had a whole mouthful when I was at 12. Um, so let's see what else. Oh, talking about brain. Recent exposures of mercury can really do a number on your brain function, though, as compared to the chronic slow increase. But if you get a sudden bump, such the first one was that lab that was in Germany. They question amalgam illness back as if it was the first review of whether amalgam was a smart thing to have in your mouth or not, because all these people in this
Stop.
German lab got toxic, and they could students were hardly able to write their exams, and that because their lab was right full of mercury vapor, because they had open like troughs of liquid mercury. Yeah. Um, which now just seems laughable, but at the time it's just, you have to cry, I think. Um, at
Yeah.
any rate, they, with that recent high acute exposure to mercury, they had a decrease in mental function. I remember that my first IQ test was taken under such stress, where I just had that mercury, that amalgam filling placed to the gum line, plus I
And
had
then
other
you
ones.
got an IQ test. You got the amalgam placing, and then went out and got an IQ test.
Yeah. The school had it scheduled at that time. It just happened to be that I had happened to have had it, the amalgam placed before. Then in my last year, senior year of high school, basically the same thing happened. I had that amalgam had to be replaced because it was leaked around the edge, so they had to replace it. So I had just had that done only like a month before. They did a second IQ test they do in high school before you go off to university, and I did okay in them. I was brighter than the average, but there's, as my wife says, there's no way you're at that low a number. I've never tried to see if I'm over 150 or not, but I'm in that area, and they're off by at least
50
20
is
points
really,
on
really
them.
smart, isn't it? Isn't it 150 like a genius
Yeah,
level?
that's the level that they let you into the
Mensa
what do they call it?
Society. I
Hmm?
think. The Mensa Society?
Yeah, but that always kind of was off-putting to me. So I never wanted to test and find out. Because
Well,
it spoke of snobbery in a way. So I said, nah.
well, people can be brilliant and not very smart, it's true.
Yep, yep,
So, one thing that's interesting, to totally change the subject here, is I'm getting kind of interested in lead and lead chelation because I'm doing it. Because
yep,
I had lead into the low, when I did my hair test, it was into the low yellow range. And Andy said, well,
yep.
don't worry about it. But now everybody's saying, oh, do, do so. So I started chelating that. I wonder what your experience with lead was and how you differentiate it from mercury. And because you had lead too, didn't you? You had everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the lead was right on that, just over the red line into the yellow, just into the yellow. And Andy would have said not to be a big worry about it, but um,
The exposure was,
lead gets recycled, because the primary place it stores is in bone. That doesn't mean you don't have it in your brain. You have it in the brain too. The brain just basically stays, yeah, whatever the blood level is. So you lower the blood level, the brain's going to drain a little bit. But the bones, of course, don't do that with the blood. They do it when the cells are regenerated and recycled. And there's 2 cycles of bone regeneration. One's about an 18-month, a year and a half, fast bone, and I assume that that'll be places like your joints. Any place there's more wear and tear, and more where ligaments attach, all those good places where you're stressing your bone, and that's the areas I picture. Don't know if anybody's proven it. What I picture that the fast recycling occurs. The slow recycling then would be like the long shafts of your legs and arms and center part of your shoulder blades, like the places that aren't being stressed particularly and are stable for long periods of time.
Mm-mm.
And that recycling is apparently on the 10-year cycle. So you slowly uh, let that loose, and then it's there again when you're forming new bones. Whatever your level is in your blood gets put back in the bones again. So Andy's process was, because you don't really have the issue that you have in the brain with mercury, you can go after the lead rather quick, hard for the first 6 months or so.
Yeah, I did that.
And you can do then certainly for the first 3 weeks, three not 3 weeks, 3 months. You have to do, if you've just had your amalgams all removed, you can't do ALA yet anyway. So you have like 3-4 days after you've had all your amalgams out and you're ready and you've proven that there's no amalgam left. You had your photographs, etc., and you're starting to chelate. You can chelate with DMSA. If you've got lead, that's a good thing to do. You're going to get 3 months of chelating with DMSA to get the lead out before you start moving mercury around. If you don't have any appreciable lead, then you don't have to use DMPS or DMSA. You can just wait your 3 months and start ALA. But
You might as
for
well.
people, yeah,
You
for
might as well.
people, I would say for people who are in their 50s and 60s before this is hitting them, they're going to be in the long storage type situation, in which case any mercury you can move out is good. And besides which, the DMSA and DMPS both have longer half lives, so you're getting a practice before you hit ALA, and you have to start doing it every 2 or 3 hours. So you do it then every weekly. I did it weekly for the first 3 months,
Mm-mm.
except for my very last one. I got DMPS because I was going to be starting it with ALA, and I wanted to know what I felt and how that reacted. So I left off my last week of DMSA only. Then I started taking DMSA every
Fine.
month. And Andy said, "Oh, 3 years, you should be done." Well, I took it 3 years, and I still had some on the lead on the chart. So, but I did say, okay, I definitely have less coming around. So I went to 2 months. Every 2 months, I do DMSA until I got 5 years in.
Did you
When I got
notice
5 years,
anything? Okay, did you notice anything particular, symptom-wise from doing that?
well, the hair test said that I got the lead down to the level at which we wouldn't bother to tell anybody to chelate it. The level was the lowest level that comes back on the hair test. Like they don't go any lower than that. So I took that as a hint that maybe I had enough out that not to worry about the 10-year stuff. It wasn't going to be enough lead to be bothersome. Um, the lead, moving lead and mercury at the same time, it's a rougher round
Yes,
than DMSA and then DMPS and ALA together. Um,
that was your experience.
yeah,
That was your
it's
experience. Not
not
just
it's
because
not
it's
it's not terrible. I didn't back off on the ALA, but I didn't get to maximum dose on which is not the 100 that Andy said early, not the 100 milligrams Andy said early in his AI book, but he later said 50 milligram as a peak.
with
I got
DMS.
to that by 3 years, and then I stayed at that level for 2 more years, but only doing it every 2 months because I wanted enough buildup to be worth the while. The rounds weren't terrible, but they were noticeably less nice.
Noticeably less time. So, when you empty out your blood, like what you suppose you've done the preliminary loading DMSA thing, and then you're emptying out your blood, and your blood's clear of lead. That means your brain's going to start dumping into your blood, right?
All your
You
issues
have
will.
it in your brain.
Yeah. So you're yeah, the DMSA is going to go out via your kidneys,
Right.
And as it goes out that way, it's going to be taking the lead that it acquires from the blood.
Yes.
Then all other organs that have free access to the blood are going to lower and
Yeah.
follow. And it's sort of it's almost like you got a series of tanks with overflows. When you get that, they they will flow out, but uh, they won't necessarily. There's a dynamic that they won't make the blood level. They'll always be a little bit more, and the further the lead is within whatever organ it is that behind, if it's in organelles in cells and not within the blood in your liver, for example, it's going to take a while for it to move to each compartment. But there's nothing stopping it from moving. So it's just going to follow what was osmosis. It follows the concentration gradient. So the lower you get the lead in your blood, and the faster it'll move out of the other organs to come into equilibrium. Um, and so when I was chelating every 2 months for lead, I would expect that I got down to a very low level of lead. And then I gradually built that up over 2 months. And then I took it back out of the blood again. And then more moved out of the organs into the blood. And you just kept emptying the blood. You just kept moving more out of
Yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
you, by keeping the blood level lower, you slow how you prevent prevent lead from moving back into bone. So you're that's your goal, is to keep the lead low enough that it's
Probably be
the
supplementing
amount that gets back in the bone is minimal, and so you don't have to chelate 10 years in order to get one full cycle. You just get what you can. And yeah,
You'd probably be
it's
supplement calcium while you're doing this, I should think, because you're pulling because the lead is displacing the
yeah,
calcium
is
in the bone.
displacing. And I think that's a dependent upon um if you've got any indication that you've got osteoporosis, definitely need to have some kind of calcium supplementation,
Mm.
because it's likely. Andy kind of hinted at. I don't think he actually said there was a relationship there, but I would be suspicious that there is, and that calcium would be wise. And then most doctors, I think, would get you on some kind of regime like that.
Anyway, yeah,
Um, Nobody needs to fall. Well, falling and breaking a hip isn't a death knell quite the same as it was for my grandparents' generation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
When all
Many
my great aunts, great uncle, they fell and broke a hip.
That was it.
Next
Yeah.
thing they had was a pneumonia, and then they were dead. Uh, yeah, um, it was really hard to see these lovely people. I had some really great aunts
Yeah,
in
well,
the shape.
it's a death sentence for people of a certain, who are old enough now too, because I
Yeah,
work with elderly people, and if they fell and broke their hip, that was it.
no, we have some surviving this now. They know they're treating it better. They're keeping antibiotic. They're getting them back up and getting them exercise and bolting them together and whatever.
Get them on reset.
Yep, yep.
So what would you think, like I'm really curious of my own condition because I got diagnosed with chronic lymphocyte leukemia, which originates in
Hmm.
the bone marrow. And I wonder
Right.
if you can you can see any connection with that and lead toxicity, because you probably
Hmm.
know more about how that works in the bones. The lead wouldn't be stored in the marrow, but it's there, like poisoning it. It's
It
close
it can
affecting it, I
be
should.
in all the bony structure of the bone. Yeah. Well, I don't have any information to really address that question directly. However,
However,
we do know from rat studies that if you poison a rat with mercury and lead,
hmm,
it's about 17 times worse than mercury alone.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's why when you're chelating lead and mercury at the same time, it is very normal for you to feel worse on your lead rounds than you do on your regular. Um, I don't, as again, I don't remember feeling bad enough that I felt I had to cut back the ALA, but I sure did take my sweet time increasing my DMSA doses per round.
Yeah.
And but with DMPS, that was no problem. Just it went rapidly up to maximum dose, and didn't feel any problem. In fact, if anything, it helped. Another thing, a note to take is if you are chelating ALA and DMSA, in a way, I can't see why you would not do that, because there's enough sources of mercury after you've chelated most of it out that you'll be acquiring some again. So why not? You're going to be waking up to take the dang pills in the middle of the night anyway. So why don't you, move a little more mercury out that may be recently acquired at the same time? Um,
Well, I can chelate at 200 milligrams of ALA, and then I take 20 milligrams of DMSA.
mhm. Well, there's yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good. One of the things I discovered, and it was so bad we lost Andy when we did
Oh,
lose him
that
any
was
time, but
terrible.
because he was just on the verge of testing something that I'm had to try. What happens when you basically chelated enough out,
Yeah.
and it'll be less for people that are really reactive and found out quickly after amalgam or other mercury exposure that they're mercury toxic, versus those of us at 50, 60 years of exposure before we figured it out.
Habitual.
um, so I found that when I went back on, I cut down from 300 milligrams of ALA to 200,
Yeah.
just on principle, because I hadn't chelated in a while. And I wasn't doing with any DMPS or DMSA,
Mhm.
and it wasn't very good. Because one of the things is, if you're chelating with DMPS or DMSA and ALA, do one dose of just the Ds after you finish your ALA. Extend that little, and it'll help mop up the mercury that the ALA drops. And I found the symptoms were, a lot of people found the symptoms are a lot better off round if you do
Okay.
that one more DMSA or DMPS dose. Other things that help that, Alka-Seltzer Gold, it's a very, very mild chelator, so it will pick up a little
Building stuff
merc.
up. Okay.
Yeah. And
Concentric
the
cap-
the other one is selenium. It's not a chelator,
Yeah, but
but
yeah.
it actually binds to mercury. And Andy wasn't quite sure what the methodology, what it was. I'd not either, but I have my pet theory.
Okay.
My pet theory is that the cells that have mercury selenium in them dump that into they basically have garbage organelles inside them that take the stuff the cell does, put your toxins and stuff in this little bag and ignore them. I think that's what sequestration is. And so my bet is that selenium combined with mercury, you get more of the sequestration, and you're shoving it away out of the way. And now that bond is not permanent, so eventually the selenium will come out and the mercury will be left behind in the organelle. Then when you come along, let's say you haven't chelated like I had for about 2 or 3 years, and you put AL, then you're tapping into some of this mercury that's hanging around. And if you don't do the stuff that you've done for years, when you were chelating in earnest, then you suddenly find out, gee, I feel pretty lousy after that comes over. Um, and so then you remember, oh, I used to do this, I used to do that, and I used this other thing. I did so, I'm going to try again. But one of the things I picked up, I picked up ringworm after that last chelation. I don't know if there's a relationship or not, but it is a yeast.
I was going to ask about that
And
next. Hmm.
yeah, and so that raised my ish thing of thinking, well, maybe I should do another hair test and see where that lead level's at.
Because you associate
Because
the yeast with the lead, or the yeast with the
it,
DMSA, or the yeast with the
well,
DMSA lead.
it's associated with the DMSA, but maybe part of that is also a lead, because you're taking it at the same time. That's what it's chelating. So maybe there's a relationship there. Um, Certainly, I know that mercury, flash exposures of mercury gave me flash things of different yeast things like thrush, like athlete's foot, like they call it crotch rot when you get it in your privates. Um, all of those kicked in when I after exposures to mercury. So
Well, that's
mercury's
mercury
definitely
in
one of the
your
ones.
immune system is what's causing that.
Yep, 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 yep. And I don't think it much matters whether it's lead or mercury. I think they both can hit your immune system pretty hard.
Immune system. And another thing, one thing that Sandra pointed out to me was that lead slows down your digestion and slows down peristalsis, so it gives the more time for things to ferment and kind of rot and go
Yeah.
out of whack. That's what it feels like.
Another another thing I've toying with is I thought I'd gotten so that I could tolerate gluten again,
Okay.
and so I was up to a family reunion and talked to some, primarily to one brother who was Brad, who you may have known from both
Yeah,
things.
yeah, I know Brad.
Yeah, and he asked, well, surprised that I was eating bread again. So then I said, well, something, I should do a test, just drop off of bread for a while, go gluten free, and then bring it back and see what happens. Well, what happens is I gain 20 to 30 points in systolic and about 15 points in diastolic on my morning blood pressure. So this is after you slept and
Your
you're
blood
actually
pressure
at
went
your
up when you stopped gluten?
yeah. No, it went up after when I challenged with
When you
gluten.
challenge it with a gluten. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I
yeah.
was like, this
So
is
I got it down. I was down in the 115s to 125s over 65 to 75. Really nice numbers that they just be
those are the ones
ecstatic
you
with, right?
like. They're not going to make you go
Yeah, and
on
then and
blood pressure.
then with exposure to glutens, I was at the best like 135 up to like 155, 160 over anywhere between 75 and 95. So it depended on how much I ate, when I ate it, how many days after, and all kinds of variables. But there's no question that the blood pressure as a whole went up. Um, well, this makes sense. You are uh, making for a leaky gut. That's one of the gluten effects of, if you react to gluten, you damage that lining in your gut, and you're now getting stuff across you shouldn't be getting across,
It could be
and
autoimmune
that
thing.
that adds, yeah, you get inflammation. You get the whole immune system all upset,
Mm.
and that's very bad for long-term longevity, for one thing, and it's very bad for heart disease. It's one of the I think it's one of the main reasons that when if mercury's messing up your digestion, so you're getting absorption of stuff you shouldn't across the
Yeah, yeah.
intestinal wall, you're setting yourself up for cardiac issues in the decades ahead. Um, what else was there about that?
Yeah, like Andy got cardiac issues.
Hmm?
Mhm. Andy
Yeah,
got
yeah, he did.
issues, yeah.
Yes. Um, Now I have on the family side, my great my grandfather, my mother's father, he'd fought in the First World War and had taken some gas at Ypres, and but he took a major chunk of shell fragment into his neck, and they couldn't take it out. It was right between his carotid and jugular vein, carotid artery, jugular vein on the one side. So he went to his deathbed with that. Um, I don't know how much that gave him heart issues, but he had heart issues. His eldest of two sons had heart issues, and my mother had heart issues. So I'm thinking that this is somewhat genetic in basis, but there's no doubt all of them. My grandfather had an orchard too, And so they spread it. And so I can't separate exposure on the farm
Isn't some of the
from,
exposure, isn't some of the toxicity actually hereditary too? It's hereditary, it's genetic, not to be able to eliminate it very well, but doesn't the mother's burden passing on to the child? I wonder how many generations that goes down.
well, I didn't find, I should have talked to Dad more about this, but it's a sensitive issue, because he's a father and he hasn't protected you as a child type thing. It gets bent out of shape. So you can only go down the road so far, and you have to realize that you're getting into sensitive area and you better shut up. Um, but at any rate, I found out that when Dad bought the farm, I thought we had a Native American, indigenous person, who was what do you call it? A farm help, I guess. But apparently he didn't come until about the time I was born. So I said, well, who drove the tractor when you sprayed the orchard? Your mother.
Oh, well, you
So
got,
my sister, older than me, was born the year after they bought the farm. Not this cloak me that. Yeah, the mom and dad lived a lot longer than that. But yeah, bought the farm is not that good.
okay, I
Anyway,
understand.
um, but they purchased the farm. Okay, and
Yeah, yeah.
my sister was next, and then I was born 4 years later. There was no child born, and we almost have a child every 2 years from mother and dad's union, um, until the one between my sister and myself, and the one between two brothers younger than me and the next brother. And I always wondered if mother's toxicity led into that. But if she was spraying the orchard for 4 seasons before I was born, she had and she was involved spraying on the orchard of her father. It wasn't a big orchard, but still had to be sprayed. Then there's a good chance she had a load of stuff she dropped into me. And a lot of my issues came up at 2 when I was being weaned, because I had my I was born October 25th. My brother's born October 6th of 2 years later. So that 2 years she had to wean me because she has another boy coming that needs the breast milk. So at any
But
rate,
if
whether it was the
one of your
milk,
sisters would have carried on some of that toxicity and passed it on to a child.
yeah, she's had her issues too.
Well,
Um,
yeah, well,
we
yeah.
a lot of people thought her health issues she was crazy about, but she's had a battle. But she had an aneurysm and survived that, a miracle. Um, and
What are daughters like?
she's looking remarkably well for a person of her age. She's got 4 years and 2 months on me. Uh, yeah, close enough.
About her
Uh,
children?
hmm?
Her
It's one
children.
child, one child. I she's brilliant. Her husband of the time that she married, and he died of a heart attack at 42.
Oh, that's awful young. So she's brilliant.
Yes,
There's
he
one
was a
symptom right
he
there.
was he
She's
was a
brilliant.
black belt in karate. He was a professor of mathematics at Sir Wilfrid Laurier University. He was an expert in Japanese history and culture. In fact, the person in the Oriental department said he could have lectured in any time in Syria. And
You're
it's a black belt in karate, third degree or something. He was like the second or third highest in all Canada. They're really into bird watching, so they went all over the Ontario bird, and they had a cabin in the woods, and he was as fit as a fiddle. He looked, um, about 140 pounds, not a spare ounce of fat on him, and he passes at 42. Um,
yeah, something going to happen there.
but any rate, his son, there's no I don't see any I haven't been exposed to him enough to pick up, but I have any evidence he's got any major issues.
Mhm.
And my Brad, who's he spends a lot more time with that with my sister's family than I do because I'm so far away. Um, and then I think if he saw anything that tripped a thing, he would have mentioned it. So
I should think
I
it would
think,
sort of like peter out after a generation, you know?
yeah, and but it's a good period of time between Betty's exposure on the farm until the child came along. So that gives her a good chance to get it out of her blood and get it, so it's in the brain, but you can't chelate it out of the brain. So he may have been saved by the fact that he wasn't, unlike my sister and I, we were born while mother was being exposed. That's a whole different ballgame. That's why amalgam is a problem for pregnant women. Is you release an exposure all the way along.
All the
If
way.
you if the amalgam was taken out and um, they're past their dump phase, let's say, as a give a rough guess of 2 years is fairly common, as fast
That
as six
may
months.
be okay.
Some
Yeah.
people have it 4 or 5 years of it, but I would say, if the child comes along 2, 3, 4 years after,
Some
then
people have 4 or 5 years of dump phase, you're saying?
well, that's what it sounds like. I'm a little
It sound like that, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. To some people claim it. Mine was
Andy
like
told
two
me
two.
18 months was the worst he'd seen. I asked him that once.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Well, you've seen it
disturbing.
in the quote where people claim now they may be mistaken. They may be getting other issues, and that's not the dumb face they're feeling, but they're feeling something, and they're called labeling it that. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt
They're
and say,
miserable. You can yeah, yeah.
but mine's at that 2 year, 2.5 year point, and that seemed to be pretty common for those of us that have a lot of mercury stuffed away.
A lot of mercury, you get a longer dump phase.
Yeah,
Makes sense. Yeah. I've
yeah,
got this girl in my support group who's got, she was a fishmonger for 7 years and ate
yeah,
fish every single day, and she's having a terrible time. Yeah. She's waiting
yeah.
for dump phase to cease. At least that's how she
The
says. Yeah.
Yeah, that be and the organic mercury compound seem to be have a very high rate of getting into the brain. When we see a hair test that shows a high mercury bar, um, we're we're basically first two questions come to mind is did you have a recent high exposure of mercury, like a
Yes.
broken
Or eating a
ball,
lot of fish.
are you eating a lot of fish?
Yeah.
There's a very high correlation of
A
that.
huge bar on a hair test.
Yeah. And basically both yeah, so we said it, if you got a high mercury bar, you're mercury toxic. We don't have to don't have to analyze the rest of the test, you're mercury toxic.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
usually the rest of the test is screwed up too. But we have had cases where the rest of the test is pretty darn normal, except you got this mercury bar right off the chart. And again, I say that really suggests a fairly recent high exposure, um,
Mhm.
either to fish or other means.
Or something's floating around your apartment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had Andy was still alive. I wish I knew her name. Um, Somebody was in our group on the back on we were in Yahoo, and she was opening some kind of office where she'd have people coming. I forgot what she was, whether she was some kind of health related thing, like a chiropractor or a what a physical therapist, or there was something medical related. Can't remember exactly what it, but she needed them to come and have this office. She was looking at this house to convert it, and so she asked about testing for mercury and found out that you can rent from environmental companies
Gotcha.
a mercury test meter.
Mm-hmm.
So she rented one, and her front foyer area and another area in this house was just off the chart high mercury. So that was the end of that sale. But what we figured probably happened is somebody's dropped numerous fluorescent bulbs in the foyer area that were never cleaned up properly. It would seem unbelievable that one could do that much, but if possible, if it's a really big one. And we have to remember that the big old long 48-inch tubes had a lot more mercury in them in
I was
back
astounded.
25, 30, 40 years ago. And if you have one that's only just being replaced now,
They
you're gonna,
last. They lasted
yeah,
pretty well.
yeah, you're gonna have a huge amount of mercury. Um, and that's what happened. I had one of the little ones break in, spiral ones break in an overhead fan. Just unscrewing it, and it just came apart right in my face. Fortunately, it wasn't hot. So the I probably didn't get that big a dose from it, but basically, I stopped my chelation with that exposure.
Goes
I
straight to
had,
your brain too. The vapor does. The vapor
yeah,
goes straight to your brain.
yep.
Yeah.
And then they broke one in my office at work, which is windowless, no fan, and they didn't tell me until I'd been in there for some time. And they said, "Well, we vacuumed it up." Oh no, the worst thing they could have done. Um, So yeah, I had some major troubles at work, that last job from those two exposures, and that's when I was starting to look for reasons why I was having trouble, and my brother hit because he was having trouble with bipolar,
Yes, yes, that's
and
right. He had a bipolar diagnosis.
and
Yes.
so he was on that, and they said you need to be tested for mercury, and they gave us the two sites for on Yahoo. And so I went out and I bought a hair test at the local health food store. Turns out I'm thinking the only one that's of that company's test ever to be on it, the list that they have in South Africa for of all the different tests. I've never seen another one since. But I had, because of that, none of the other people knew how to interpret it. And I basically went through, I got four elements here that are in the red. No question. That's done. It doesn't matter what, got
Yeah.
four in the red. That's a rule three. We're done, where it's a positive test. Well, then my wife said, "Well, we need another test because we don't. You just pointed out this one's not well known enough." So I went and got a true DDI test, and it came out one of not the worst I've ever seen, but it's in the running, in the second tier of,
My
and
brother was the worst I'd ever seen. My brother's test. Yeah.
yeah, and I had AI by that time, and I went through the I think 16 questions I could answer. That's one of those ones on the symptom checklist. Andy said that it's more robust than a hair test. You get that test and you're positive on that one. You don't worry about the stinking hair test, although the hair test will tell you other things, which is kind of handy.
What page is that
Um,
on an AI? The symptoms checklist. You remember?
what
The
what
symptoms
about it again?
checklist. What page is it on? And
Oh,
illness.
um,
Remember stuff.
54, 50, it's either 54 or 56 to 64. Um, and don't worry about the questions that you don't have the answer for. Different people answer different numbers. You don't have to answer all the questions. It's a loose that way.
Mercury
There
that.
are a bunch of questions. There are a bunch of questions that are, if you have high A, B, and C, then choose yes. Okay. Well, sometimes for the mercury fogged brain, those questions verbiage is such that it's very hard for people to process if they're really sick. And so I've always said, if you have problems with a question, just come back with it to the group and we'll help you get the answer for that question.
That's
But
diagnostic right there. Yeah.
yeah, well, probably, yeah. If it's highly, but you want the answer for the person, because it's a really great thing to realize that you're not crazy, you're just poisoned. As Andy said, you're not crazy, you're toxic. And knowing that, it
Very comforting.
underpins everything, and then you're in business. So it's very important that the person not only knows that but accepts it, and is willing to go whatever it takes to get
We're getting a
that.
t-shirt. Joanne and I are making a t-shirt with Andy's picture. You're not crazy, you're poison.
um,
Still in the
so
world.
what okay, so I think there was, out of the 16 questions I could answer, I think I got yes on 12 of them.
Well, that'll do
And it
it.
turns out by his chart, that's like highly, highly, highly likely that you're mercury toxic. Like it's basically you're off the charts high. Uh, so, and I think you're right that if it should be, never thought if he's alive, he would really laugh at that, but that should be there. If you're having trouble taking analyzing the answers for these questions, that's a positive result right
That's a
there.
positive result for a couple of questions. Yeah, it counts
Maybe
for
he could
five
count it for two or
points.
three, but at any rate, yeah, I think he had that sense of we have that sense of humor, don't we? A little on the black side. Uh,
Yeah, well,
so
he was a very witty guy. He had a lovely
yeah.
sense of humor. It was a lot of fun to have
Well,
it.
one of the things that I really regret, and I was getting near the end of my chelation process, but it wasn't quite there yet. I was hoping to when I got rid that save the money and then fly out with Catherine or not, depending on what, if we couldn't afford to both go, then one of us, um, and meet Andy in person, just to that he deserved. He had advised a lot for my brother and for me, and
Oh, yeah, saved your
and
life.
he de- yeah,
He saved your lives, probably, in a way.
yeah, yeah, well, in a way, yeah, or we would have been put in retirement homes too early,
You would have been in
and
you would have
yeah,
been in yeah, nursing homes by now. Like
and then the flu shots would have killed me off. Uh,
that they would have killed. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Yep.
yeah.
That's what happened with my parents.
Um, Any rate, didn't get to be there, and so uh, what's that one comedian? God bless you, Mrs. So and so, wherever you are. I think that was Jimmy Durante, I think, but it's basically thanks, Andy, wherever you are.
Yeah, thanks to Andy, wherever you are. He was getting ready, like he was imminently going to book his tickets to come to Vermont because I'd been to Seattle. So he was
Yeah,
coming to Vermont. I was going to put him up in the Airbnb in this building and
yeah,
take him to meet my son-in-law, who is a chemical engineer who thinks I'm crazy. So, you
yeah,
know, but it
yeah,
didn't happen, so they still think I'm crazy.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I really see us. That was terrible. Yeah. Oh
yeah.
well,
That was a yeah. Um,
big blow for all of us.
Linda said, "Can you write it? I can't write. I can't write the announcement for the group to announce his passing."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, that's going to be a tough one, isn't it?"
Yeah.
Um, Not quite as bad as being asked to sing "How Great Thou Art" for my mother's funeral. That I couldn't do that.
Just, great.
It was her favorite hymn, and I loved to have sung it, but there's, I couldn't hold out the emotions. I was basically broke up just trying to start singing it. Just said, screw it, I'm not doing it.
That's
I don't need to see a grown man up there crying away trying to sing this song.
yeah. So I have one final question here, which I kind of know the answer to anyway, but somebody in my support group asked this, and I said, "Oh, well, I'll ask Brian when I get him on the phone." And they're talking about being in sauna, and can you get exposed to other people off-gassing their personal mercury or lead when
Uh,
you're in sauna?
hmm, Interesting.
Huh, I just thought, no, it's not enough, but maybe it could.
Well, it's the thing. The argument is it is enough that you can feel the difference. I've never done this. Well, that's not true. On the cruise, I got into the sauna. Um, I haven't done enough incidents over a long enough time to get a real feel for how much mercury might be being moved.
In yourself
I
per
did,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I did do it when I did do a round when it was on board ship, and I did chelate that one, and then I didn't do any more rounds when I was on board. It was two weeks on board. We did New England colors. Um, so I do have that one, but I was the only one in the whole darn place, so I certainly didn't get exposed to rebreathing it. Um, it's going to under those conditions, hot and humid like that, the mercury's going to stay floating about. It does fall out of the air. It's heavy. Um, but you're
It's
moving around and you get the hot air and there's convection currents going. I
enough
imagine it's going to stay airborne
to
pretty well.
affect you.
Um, so how would you put it? Sometimes you can overthink these things. You just go, if you can avoid it, sauna by yourself. Um, and I don't think, I mean, I've never heard of anybody saying that they've seen sauna with little balls of mercury sitting around so apparently they get aired out enough that we don't get so much mercury at the ground level that it condenses out and forms, you get those little silver balls of mercury running around. But it'd be nice to have the airflow flowed out for a while from whoever was there before. How would you put it? It's being a bit paranoid, but on the other side of the coin is the one side we don't know if there's harm done. The other side, you probably not any harm done. If you're sauning alone, yeah, you rebreathe some of your own what you sweated out, but not very much. And you probably get a lot more out than you breathe in. But you get enough people packed in there, you know, that's a whole nother ball game. Now, if you got three people and they got a big sauna and you got 8-10 feet between you, I don't think that's a whole lot different than a small one with one person in it. So, uh, just let how would you say? We got a lot of unknowns, so just basically say do what you're
Yeah,
comfortable with.
whatever.
But typically, from what Andy had to say about it, sweating a lot in Arizona when he lived there, basically an outdoor sauna, if you will, exercising or like to the point where he was sweating, he tended to feel a lot better.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if I think that's pre-chelation. I think that's just that he sweated out enough to make himself feel better. So there's no question that sauna is a good thing. Um, I wouldn't want to be in one where I'm jam packed shoulder to shoulder with everybody. Of course, I'm not that, um, don't want to be that personal with people anyway. But that one thing Mercury makes you're not that enthused to be in a big crowd. Um,
I think
so yeah,
my chances with it and chelate every couple of months. Yeah.
yeah. So
Being
I'm
exposed
waiting
to
to
it
get
all the time.
uh, waiting to get rid of the ringworm. It it's a salve I put on every day, and it's gradually going away. The red areas are smaller, not so red, and so I'm going to use this tube up. I'm still not going to go back to the dermatologist, but I'm not going to chelate as long as I've got this thing, because I have a suspicion that the reason I got it and the reason it blew up uh, was because of chelating again.
Your immune system.
Yep, this wasn't. I'm older now than I was when I was
I know,
chelating.
me too.
Yeah.
And you're just like more sensitive to everything, which reminds me of the quotation from that book we all liked when we were kids about Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan. I don't know if you read those. And Don Juan says, when you're young, your body's stupid. So you can comfort yourself with that thought. When you're young, your body's stupid.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, was it George Burns said something? He was talking about his love life basically, but he was saying when I was 18, I was really, really dumb.
I was too.
That he didn't
Myself.
that that he missed so many opportunities because he was just didn't get it. Well, at that generation, it was very common that girls didn't get explained what the birds and the bees were until they got married, and both husband and wife. In fact, that's the one sex experts from University of India IU. Forget the name. He was originally a insect person, and he learned that basically every system has variation in it. And he brought forth that human sexuality may not be simply A and B. That may be a lot more than that. But at any rate, he commented on that they went to the marriage bed not knowing a thing about what to do.
Yeah, well, I remember trying to find something in the encyclopedia because there's a lot of information for the kids now. People are complaining that there's too much. But
Yeah,
yeah, I don't
yeah, yeah. Anyhow, yeah, it's
know.
So yeah, I think quality of one thing is a huge effect on quality of life, even though I've had other issues come along. I got retested for my CPAP to get a new CPAP machine. Um, so far I'm beating prostate cancer. My last two, my I've got 2 years in of 5 with low test results coming back, so that's great. But they won't call you cured until you get 5 years out. Um, I'm suspicious that's what uh, King Charles has. And if so, I'm assuming it sounds like they caught it early where they did with me too. So that's got a really good outlook for him. I'm hoping that's because they said if you're going to get a cancer, catching prostate cancer and getting it really early is has the high, like you're 98, 99% likely to fix it. You know,
Well, that's what they
and
said
there's no
about leukemia. They said it's the best kind of cancer to get. It takes for, you're going to die of something else before it gets you. So, but I just would like to. I know there's a, I know there's a way to beat it and to get rid of it totally and this and that, but I just feel kind of like tired of dealing with health issues now, solving like complicated, intractable problems, you know,
yes.
so like, if it takes a long time, okay, let it do its thing.
Well, and I think you got what, 3 years on me? You're 74.
I'm 75.
So
I'll be
you're 75.
76 in April. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, in April. Yeah, so I was right with but not allowing your next one. Yeah. So we're getting that thing. We get another decade and a half in,
Yeah, that's
and
about it.
without anything, yeah,
So,
then we've lived this. I'll have lived as long as my all grand one grandparent made it to 90, 87, no 80, no 89. Um, the man that my son is named after is in the family tree. His sister was my great grandmother, and he made it to 97.
so the programming
So
is there, but
yeah,
my
and
my
if it,
family too, they live to be very old, of course, in recent generations, they all got dementia for the last 10 years of their life.
yeah,
So
well, he
that's
didn't. He was bright as a tack, and he was just had lunch with his daughter, who they were living together to help support each other because she was only 20 years younger than him. So she was in her late 70s. Um, and great. Then he's in his 90s. So, um, anyway, at 18, he had the job of plowing literally the back 40 of his farm. His parents had gone to town, and he suddenly had an appendix attack. And so he unhitched the horses from the plow, rode the horses up to the barn, got the spare carriage slash um, buggy horse, hooked up the lousier of the buggy because the good buggy went to town. So he had like a one of those buckboards with just the springs for the seats, and you're going down this old heavy road with all the ruts, and he's suffering from the acute effects of a appendix attack. And at the time, you just went into the doctor's office, and they just threw around a lot of carbolic acid and cut you open and took it out because you're a dead man if it stayed, and you had a 50% chance if they carved it out. So at 18 he had that happen, and so I asked him how did he manage to survive all that. He says he's a Scottish heritage came. I was too ornery to die. Too ornery to die.
Some people were, before the great, like I've heard one commentator refer to it as the great poisoning,
Yeah,
like before people started to be seriously poisoned, and happened. And because our grandfathers and great grandfathers, they were tough and they
yeah,
lived long.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted something that happened to me after my amalgams were taken out. I lost all the skin on my palms and my feet. They all went bright pink.
Oh, you
What
got
does
the
that?
Pink's disease
Pink's
thing.
disease.
You got
Yep.
Pink's disease at
And
your
we were
age.
when I talked to my GP about it, that's what he looked up, and he said it's Pink's disease, and it's from using these mercury compounds. But he didn't ask me if I'd been exposed to mercury or had any dental work done, and I didn't know at that time that the amalgams were half mercury, and that I'd just been given a whole bunch of exposure to mercury, and because
Well,
that would have changed everything if it had caught it. But except that was in 1988, a decade before Andy.
because he didn't know
So
that there was anything to do for it, so he didn't say anything because, like, just live with it. There's no way to treat it.
yeah, right.
Mm.
And if even if we had picked it up and figured out as mercury, and that's what the problem was,
But you're done.
the treatments of the time would have made me worse.
Yeah. I used to have bright
Would have been
red palms. This part here used to be so bright red that people would notice it, but it
yeah.
never it never peeled. I never got
Well,
the
I lost all the calluses across my hands, lost them off my feet. That was, you lost. You used to be able to go around barefoot in the summer, right?
Yes, yes, we
I
did.
can't ever. I lost all uh,
Callus.
callus. So it's like walking stones, like walking on Legos. It's just
You
awful.
get used to it. I mean, every summer we'd come up here to Vermont and we'd walk
Yeah,
around, take our shoes off, and it took a few days to get toughen up.
yeah, yeah. It probably will around here if I did that, but I just decided now that's
Why bother at this
why
stage?
bother. It's not like I have nice little cool pools to wade out into and stuff that's really cool. To use with bare feet. But um, yeah, the few times I do it, like down the black driveway to take the garbage out in the morning, and the sun's been up long enough that it's pretty hot on the feet. But yeah, at least I tell whatever the little stone, I know I found it. So
We've been
anyway,
talking a long time. I'm gonna stop this now.
yeah, I'm not gonna bill you for it.
Goodbye, because we've been at it a while. Though I did want to talk about I want to talk about the mass poisoning of the United States, but we can do that next time. All right.
Yeah.